got your Mac guys here on Birds 365. Thanks for streaming in with us. We appreciate our guests streaming in as well. I've been talking football with this guy for over 30 years. I think one of the best writers and opinion generators in the NFL, and has been for a long time. Doing it these days at BaxFootballGuru.com, and a very good follow on Twitter at Bax. Football Guru. I love the nuggets that he puts up daily on the NFL. Russell Baxter joins us here on Birds 365. Russell, it's been a minute. How you been, bud?
It has been a minute. Technical difficulties aside from the last time I was coming on, so I'm not going to jinx it. I'm not going to say anything else. It's good to see both of you.
You already have. Yeah,
and
that horse is out of the park, buddy. Now that you're on there, you know your signal's going down in the next 3 minutes.
Oh, absolutely. It's unbelievable. Good to see you, John. It's unbelievable. It's already been past a month since the Super Bowl. And
how about that? Time flies, man.
Yeah,
38 days until the draft. I love your little, and I love where you go. And you went Bob Tucker on me, and you went who else? George
Arnie
Rogers,
Herbert?
I think. George Rogers, I think was. I love that.
Well, I try to be as thorough as possible because, one of the things, I'm not going to get on a soapbox. One of the things I think we forget to do, not everybody in the media, is we forget to teach. And there's so much good history out there. There's so many hot takes. I'm going to go with the colder takes, from like 100 years ago and so on, and try to mix it up. And, one of the new things I have on Facebook is called Football Past and Present. So we give you everything that's going on in free agency, but we also look back and, guys like Clark Judge and Rick Goslin have stuff on my Facebook page. And, we all follow each other on Twitter. And, Jody knows I've been going out to the Pro Football Hall of Fame induction since 1989. Already booked my hotel. I'm ready to go. It's, pack up the family truckster and here we go. It's such a great, if you've never been there for the weekend, I think both of you probably have.
Yeah.
It's such a great time. See old friends, and me, fortunately, doing what I've done for so long, I get to see a lot of guys who I worked with who have been inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Derek Brooks, Michael Irvin, Emmitt Smith, and of course, Chris Berman hosts the ceremonies now, and it's been doing it for a long time. So it's always good to see him and Morton. It's a rush of nostalgia. The first year I went was 1989. The ceremony was still on the steps. It was Saturday morning at 11 o'clock. The Hall of Fame game was at 2:30. The first class I saw, I was really lucky. I got to see Terry Bradshaw's wild, emotional speech where he wanted to put his hands under Mike Webster's butt one more time. That was also Art Shell, Willie Wood, and Mel Blount. And I met a guy named Joe Horrigan, who has since retired, but I know you know Joe and so on, and get to see him. It's just such a great nostalgia. It's a lot of fun. It never changes. But if there are changes, it's changes for the good. And I think this year and last year, the fact that they expanded the seniors committee to get three seniors in instead of one is a big positive. And hopefully they go forward with that so we can get this back.
Yeah, it's a big year for Jody, Russell, because we got two Jets going in this year. Joe Klecko, one of those senior candidates, Terrell Rivas. So big year for Jody in the Pro Football Hall.
Oh, absolutely. Ken Riley is one of the senior members. Yeah. And of course, Chuck Howley, who remains the only Super Bowl MVP on a losing team.
How about that? Yeah, those are the kind of nuggets you get from Russell. I love it. I love the history of this game.
Back in those days, I was actually a Cowboy fan. So, yeah, these are guys that I truly appreciated and rooted for that are going in this year. So, Russell, have a great time in August. All right, jettisoning forward to 2023. Just before we punch you up, Jen and I were discussing a friend of yours, mine, anybody who is a National Football League fan over the last 25 years, Peter King had his Monday morning column up today, and he rated the teams for the first week of free agency. Winning the first week guarantees you nothing. It's better than losing the first
you're not
week.
Winning the Super Bowl, pretty much. You win in March, you're not winning in February.
Well, for a long time, Washington was a free agency dynasty. But I won't mention the fact that they haven't even been to the NFC title game since 1991.
Ouch. Yeah, shot on goal.
That just kind of slipped out. Sorry about
yeah, I hear you. But it's fun to debate. It's fun to talk about. And sometimes you win free agent and it takes 2 years, and then you see the effects thereof, and a team can make a lengthy playoff run and maybe even a Super Bowl appearance. Who do you think won the first week of free agency?
Well, one of the things I always look at with free agency is less is more. Less is more. And that's why I loved Philadelphia's offseason last year. You know, they made very few moves. They got Hassan Reddick. They traded for A.J. Brown. A lot of times I see, and I didn't see Peter's column, but you'll see people write stuff. The team that signed the most players won free agency. Well, it really doesn't work like that, because we know in all sports, I mean, I'm not the biggest baseball aficionado because I don't study it like I do football, but I remember for years the Baltimore Orioles were always winning the offseason in baseball, and it didn't necessarily work like that when it got on the field. And I see teams that are doing less again, but being more proficient. Now, Chicago had the most cap room coming in, and they've addressed so many things. Then again, they also have a 10-game losing streak coming into the season. They hired a defensive guy in Matt Eberflus last year, and I believe they gave up the most points in the league. So that's a team beset. That's a team beset with problems.
By the way, thank you for bringing that up, Russell, because Jody and I disagree on Chicago. Jody's a big Justin Fields guy. I like Justin Fields as well,
Yes.
but if you have a young quarterback, wouldn't it make sense to go get an offensive guy to cultivate that young quarterback? Nothing against Matt Eberflus,
Right.
Their decisions don't make sense to me. So when they go out and they have a bunch of money, you have to get better, right? You had the number 1 pick in the draft. They traded out, but they were the worst team in football. So to me, it's fixed. It's almost a fixed game. They have to get better. They have to get better because they can't get any worse, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're making good decisions, like spending $92 million on off-ball linebackers in the 2023 NFL.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying here. And now they must make hay with their draft choices in order to get him some young offensive talent to surround him with. Now, I know they brought in it's funny. I thought that the guys they brought in as of late, especially Robert Tonyan. Now, I know they already have Cole Kmet, but that 2 tight end thing, especially in today's league where you have so many people and you have so many linebackers trying to get after the quarterback. And, you know, I'm not going to do a whole thing on coverage skills, but tight ends against certain defenses already opened things up. And Tonyan I was surprised Green Bay, I know he only signed a 1-year deal with the Bears, but it kind of shows you what's going on with the Green Bay Packers right now, too. They seem to be – they opened up all this cap room, Cody and John, and they really haven't brought anybody in, I think, except a long snapper, okay? So the team that intrigues me, and I know it's a team that finished strong last year, is Detroit.
That's the team I mentioned.
They've signed 5 free agents. They just brought in Chauncey Gardner. Just some of the other moves, and some of the guys they have also retained. They have a very interesting, productive defensive end, John Kaminsky, who I thought would be a guy who would get on the open market, get some bids, but they made sure he didn't get away. There's a lot of optimism in that town. They had their first winning season since 2017. I know, again, I'll go back to 1991. That's the last time the Lions won a playoff game, when they beat the Cowboys that year and got to the NFC title game. But Detroit's made like 5 additions, and I think all solid additions for a team that finished strong and even with nothing to play for, went into Lambeau Field and knocked the Packers out of the playoffs.
Oh, by the way, we talked about this again right before you jumped in. We had our buddy Tommy Lawler from Eagles Blitz on. He mentioned if Jalen Carter were to fall down to number 10 at the Eagles might be willing to look past the very bad week prior to the combine that he had. He's never getting a 10 because if he gets to 9, the Chicago Bears will take him. Write it down. Jody McDonald said Matt Eberflus is not going to let that talent get past number 9. So if you're banking on Eagles getting lucky and think Card's going to fall to 10, Howie's going to have to move up to do so, which we saw him do just a couple of years ago. John and I talked about it earlier in the show as well. When he had to get Devontae Smith, he got aggressive and moved up. Don't know if they would look to do that for Jalen Carter, but write it down. The Bears will get him. If he comes down to 9, I think he isn't even going to get down as far as 9.
Well, kind of put the bow on free agency. To me, if you're using free agency to rebuild your team, you're already in trouble. You really have to have a solid core to go on, draft well, keep those guys for 3 or 4 years. And again, across all sports, if you're just using veterans and spending a lot of money, and that's how you're going to fix your team, you might sneak one in there, do a few trades, and then you become the Los Angeles Rams right now, who are on the fence apparently with Matthew Stafford. They lost Von Miller to big money last year. They traded away Jalen Ramsey. This team, they became the first Super Bowl champion to lose a dozen games the following year.
Yeah. They went
But
from
Russell.
They went from them picks to we better get some picks back. They haven't had any.
And by the way, they're now a trivia. Who was the last first round pick of the Rams? It's Jared Goff, 2016.
Wow.
How about that?
It's been that long.
Yeah, I
Holy
mean,
mackerel.
who does that remind? You guys will know. Who does that remind? That's got Bobby Beathard written all over.
Yeah. Different era.
Now, you'll appreciate this, Mr. History. I thought you were going back all the way to George Allen with the Redskins when he used to trade every draft pick he ever got for a veteran play. They didn't draft anybody. They'd have drafts where they'd pick one guy.
And Bobby had a little hand in that too, in the latter year with Redskins. And he certainly did that with, I think, the Chargers. Every year he would give up the first round pick and draft somebody pretty good in the second round. Okay. But again, some people like to trade out and so on, but the Rams, 2000. I mean, Seattle had a little streak there for a while, and then
Seattle.
And so on.
Yeah, they won.
Maybe the NFC West teams just don't like the first round. Maybe it's too early for them to get up or whatever. So,
all right. So, Russell, let me ask you this: do you not like what the Cowboys did the last couple of days, getting Stephon Gilmore for a 5 and Brandon Cooks for a 6? That's trading picks, them picks for guys who can step in and help us and win, but there's a price to pay down the line. Do you not like what the Cowboys did?
I don't dislike what the Cowboys did. By the way, I keep on want to double check this. I don't think Brandon Cooks has ever been a free agent.
No, he's been traded 4 times. It's amazing. Right. I think he should, whenever Brandon Cooks retires, Russell,
yes,
he should sign a 1-day contract with 4 different teams. And they can all trade back and forth.
I think he should orchestrate a deal with the New York Stock Exchange, because I've never seen anyone do more trading with one thing than Brandon. I mean, he's always getting, and yet he's a
good player. He's a good player. He's not a great player. Good player. It's weird.
If I remember right, he was in the Super Bowl against the Eagles for the Patriots when he got hurt.
Yeah.
And so, but he's always been a good player. But again, you remember for years, Anquan Bolden couldn't hit free agency. He was getting dealt a couple times. And I think he ended his career. He finally wound up as a free agent and so on after being in the league 10 years. No, I don't. I like Stephon Gilmore. It's amazing how a guy who was defensive player of the year 3 or 4 years ago has now all of a sudden hit the free agent circuit, and it's been all over the place. Although, again, this was another trade. But listen, the Cowboys have to build on consecutive 12-win seasons. I mean, it's the first time they've been in the playoffs in consecutive years since 2006 and 2007. One was the Tony Romo flop, and the other one is when they lost to the wild card Giants, who beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl. So they haven't strung together a lot of playoff streaks in terms of getting there. I guess they just need to avoid the 49ers if they get in the playoffs this year.
That's a problem for them.
All right. History by the question. Yeah, go ahead, Jody.
Let me add this, and then you can ask your question, John. Brandon Cooks, 9 years in the league, 1,000 yards 6 times.
Yeah.
And
really good player.
Eagle fans can remember this past year with 2,000-yard receivers. Before that, it'd been like a decade since they had a 1,000-yard wide receiver. So a 1,000-yard wide receiver, even in a 17-game season, is a pretty good accomplishment. He's done it 6 out of 9 years. I have no idea why he's been traded 4 times. Just doesn't make any sense.
I want to delve into history with you, Russell, because I want to ask you this question. Back in the 70s, when you had these great teams, we mentioned George Allen a little bit, even further back, but the Steelers with Chuck Knox and Miami and Oakland, and even in the NFC, you had Dallas, Minnesota, with Bud Grant, who just passed away, unfortunately, the LA Rams. Back then, you could get this core together and you'd have it together for 10 years. Versus now, where you have free agency, you have this constant upheaval. Is it more difficult to sustain success now than it was back then, do you think?
It's not even a question. It definitely is. That's why we haven't seen a repeat champion, and it's going on 20 years. The 2003-04 Patriots were the last team to win back-to-back Super Bowls.
And that's why I love when people ask me who's the greatest coach of all time, I say Belichick for that reason, because he did it in this era.
Yes.
Where it's constant, turnover each year.
It's funny you said that. When people ask me who the greatest team of all time is, I say the 70 Steelers, and I say it for this reason. They won back-to-back Super Bowls playing old school football. The league changed the rules in 1978 to open up the passing game. Okay. A lot of different rules changed and so on. Less contact after 5 yards, extending your arms for pass blocking. Except, guess who won the Super Bowl with new rules the first 2 years? The Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, greatest dynasty, it's got to be the Patriots because of what they've been able to accomplish for 20 years. Okay, there's only ever been one team to have 20 consecutive winning seasons, and that was the Cowboys from 66 to 85. The Patriots did it 19 straight years and were to a hell of a lot more Super Bowls than the Cowboys were. And they've done it so many different ways. The funniest thing is when the Patriots have had team that scored a whole boatload of points, they haven't won the Super Bowl. But this was a team in 2001, and I've heard Eric Mangini repeat this as well. They scored 3 offensive touchdowns in 3 postseason games and walked away with a Lombardi trophy. Their defense and special teams had 3 touchdowns. Okay, I mean, you think about, it was all plays. I always made the case if Adam Vinatieri would have kicked one more field goal in the Super Bowl, he would have been Super Bowl MVP. Yeah. But John, you're spot on. It is hard to sustain. And you just watch now. I just wrote a piece about the Buccaneers, who are now in flux. Okay, Cameron Brate was cut. Donovan Smith was cut. Leonard Fournette was cut. Brady retired. They fired Byron Leftwich. The Rams just won the Super Bowl. Look at all the changes that's going on with them. It is hard to sustain. And yet, back when we were watching football in the 70s, I'll bet most football fans who follow their teams could name the offensive and defensive starting lineups.
Yeah, they never changed for at least a decade. Mm-hmm. When you got that core group together, and those teams were, there were so many great teams in that era that couldn't get past the Steelers or, because they were, I agree.
Well, ponder the Minnesota Vikings, who now have their share of people in the Hall of Fame. And hopefully Jim Marshall gets in there one day and so on. But,
it's amazing he's not in, by the way.
Yeah, it is. And he's one of my omissions when I do my pieces and so on. But think about this. When they played the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, no team in the AFL history had won more games than the Chiefs.
Yeah.
Okay. So then they wind up playing Miami. They played Miami in 73s. People will tell you that the 73 Dolphins were better as a football team than the 72 undefeated Dolphins because they were more mature and they were more dominant. All right. So, Miami started. Then they run into the start of the Steelers dynasty in the Super Bowl. Okay. Oh, God. Well, then they get a break for 2 years and they run into the other most frustrated team of the decade, the Oakland Raiders, who absolutely smacked them around. So, I mean, they faced 4 of the great teams of their eras in those 4 Super Bowls. And it's no wonder the Vikings have played in 4 Super Bowls and never scored a point in the first half in any of them.
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
that was, and I say the same thing with Marv Levy in Buffalo. I would say with Bud, because I got to know Bud. I covered the Vikings for a while. Just one of the great coaches of all time. Won an NBA champion. Think about that. He was a 2-time champion with the Minneapolis Lakers. But just a great story. And he just passed away well over 90.
I was there when Bud got inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It was still at the steps, by the way.
And he was a former Eagle, by the way, as well, for those.
And a CFL champion.
I was going to say, for those of you north of the border, won Grey Cups up there in the CFL.
4 Grey Cups, which obviously doesn't matter as much. But, Marv Levy as well. In a lot of ways, Russell, going to that many straight Super Bowls was more impressive than winning one. I always thought.
I don't argue with that. The fact that they're still the only team to do it, should tell you something. And I know things seem to get worse every which way, and so on. But isn't it interesting? People who kind of keep an eye on the Hall of Fame, and they always talk about team accomplishments, et cetera, and so on. Bud Grant and Marv Levy were both 0-4 in Super Bowls, and yet are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Yeah. And that's why I think Dan Reeves will be in one day, who has a resume not only as a coach but a player. Okay, I mean, I think Dan Reeves has participated one way and the other in 9 Super Bowls. Okay, magnificent record. Obviously, took 2 different franchises to a Super Bowl, and that's not even including his playing career. But it's just such a John. It's funny you mentioned off the top and about the Steelers and the Raiders and the Dolphins and the Rams and the Vikings and the Cowboys. And in the 1970s, they were basically the 6 teams. There'd be an outlier every once in a while, maybe Denver.
It's like Jim Hart Cardinals.
For 2, who won the NFC East in 1975 and so on. But I think those are the teams with the 6 best records. And I believe off the top of my head, those 6 franchises, now the Rams didn't win one, the Vikings didn't win one, but I think they were 9 of the 10 Super Bowl champions in the 1970s. Miami won 2, Oakland won 1, Pittsburgh won 4, the Cowboys won 2, and Baltimore in 1970 was kind of the outlier. Yeah. Then. So now you look across the board and how many teams have won their first Super Bowl title since free agency started. It's a whole new beast.
70, the Jim O'Brien field goal.
Yep.
Yeah. Would have been Steelers 4, Cowboys 3. If the Cowboys had won that one, you could have the argument. You really can't. Steelers.
Well, here's 2 interesting facts about that. Probably the best throw in Super Bowl 5 was Bob Lilly's helmet in the air after they lost the game. Okay. And how's this for a stat? There have been 57 Super Bowl champions who have combined to turn over the ball only 64 times in the 57 Super Bowls. Okay. By the way, the losers have turned over the ball 164 times.
There we go.
But I go back to the 70s Colts.
It's amazing you know that right off the top of your head.
Lack of a social life will do it for you every time. But the 70s Colts went in the game what they called the Blunder Bowl, Super Bowl 5. The Colts had 7 turnovers in Super Bowl 5 and won the game. So they were a Super Bowl champion with 7 turnovers. The other 56 Super Bowl champions had 57 turnovers.
Wow,
that's how the game was played back then. Dallas had 4 turnovers in that game. That was a very, very sloppy game. Very hard hitting. Mike Curtis, and we talk about Chuck Howley, who was the MVP of the game, which was only fitting considering how it was. John Mackey caught a deflected 75-yard touchdown pass. It was just an odd football game, but it is what it is.
You mentioned the Lilly helmet throw. What game was it, Super Bowl or not? He had like the greatest sack ever. Why do I think
the next year? The next year against Greasy, right? 29 yards.
29-yard sack for Mr. Landry. Yes, I do remember that one back in the days. I was a Cowboy fan 40 years ago. All right, last thing, Russell. I haven't worked with you as often as I have, know you dedicate yourself when the draft comes around to evaluating, scouting, breaking down film of draft picks. First week of free agency, you're like us, right in the middle of the NFL, but then you got to turn a page at some point and start saying, all right, we got a month to get ready before we're going to add some collegiate talent. When do you start really, truly putting your opinions together for the draft? We'll surely have you back on again before the draft, but have you already started the process?
Well, to a degree, I have other things going on in life where I don't get to spend as much time as I do. And now things are different. It used to be after the season was over, you really kind of delved into the draft because there was no free agency. Jody, the first time I was on the air with you was 1988. We were still 5 years away from free agency. So it is a little different.
Plan B free agency.
Plan B. Oh, I know. Which turned out to be Plan Z for a lot of people and so on. Yeah. And then, of course, in 92, the court cases and all that. In 93, we finally had real free agency, as you would call it, and so on. But as you get a little closer, and listen, I read a lot of different stuff from the guys who do great work. Obviously, Mel, who I've known for a long time, and Todd McShay, and Lance Zierlein is a guy that I used to do radio with down in Houston. And when the NFL had a short-lived NFL magazine in which I wrote for, and asked, they were looking for a draft person, and I suggested Lance. And I'm not patting myself on the back, but the NFL.com wind up hiring Lance.
Yeah, still doing it, right?
Their guy, but I used to do radio with him and John Granado down in Houston, even before the Texans were around and so on. He's a good guy. He's a good friend. Obviously, Daniel Jeremiah, who is a former NFL scout, and you guys,
former Eagles scout,
you know all about him. Great guy and so on. Watch the All-Star games, but more importantly now, it used to be you used to gauge your draft on a team's needs. Now a team's needs change by the time you get around to the draft. In fact, sometimes they change right on the night of the draft.
Yep.
Yeah.
As we have seen. So I'm still holding off a little better now. It's been a frantic 4 or 5 days just track. I mean, it's on a Sunday night, you're thinking things are going to be quiet, and all of a sudden Johnson winds up with the Eagles and the Brandon Cooks trade. And listen, I learned my lesson a couple of years ago when Donovan McNabb was traded on Easter.
Yeah, there are no down days.
There are no down times, which I love it. I love it. It used to be when I was at college and Pro Football News Weekly, I actually wrote college football during the offseason before we got to free agency.
Russell, there is a reason why we call the show Birds 365. That's the way the league year works. Hey, buddy, great catching up. Good to see you. I will definitely reach out again well before the draft. We do want to get you on when you've got a little bit more research done. We've got a little bit more research done. Get a little bit closer. We'll definitely get you back on. Thanks for jumping in today.
My pleasure. It's great to see both of you. I love all the nostalgia talk and so on. And 37 days, more than our share of Hall of Famers when it comes to 37 days.
All right. Give us a little hint. Who's coming up tomorrow?
Well, I think we got Jimmy Johnson, the old San Francisco 49ers cornerback. And then there, maybe a couple of guys who aren't in the Hall of Fame. So 37, we're getting up to 36, which obviously Jerome Bettis fans and so on. And when you get in the 30s, you have 2 days that you look forward to. 34, which is obviously
a tough one. That's a
Thurman Thomas, Walter Payton, Earl Campbell right off the bat. Yeah. And then 32, Jim Brown,
a lot of 32.
Harris, Marcus Allen. So, we get into the 30, even 28 is a good one too. Yeah. Like Marshall Faulk, Adrian Peterson,
AP,
Curtis Martin. And then down, obviously, we'll get to 12, which is,
And speaking of 32, I really do believe this is the week that OJ catches the real killer. I'm just saying it may or may not happen, but if that's the case, you gotta be ready to move on the fly, Russell. I expect OJ to be 32 if he does catch the killers this week.
He's still looking.
Me that promise right now,
we
Russell.
Know that.
He's very persistent.
Yeah.
So.
RB, great stuff, brother. Appreciate it greatly. We'll get you back on in a month or so.
Thanks, Russell.
God.
Russell Baxter from ProFootballGuru.com. Check him out on Twitter at BaxFootballGuru.
Yeah, I love the history stuff.
He does.
You got to put up with it from me occasionally.
And he
Eagles
is
fans.
Russell's as good an NFL historian as there is. Period. End of sentence. End of paragraph. End of story. He's as good out there, and he is. He's a Hall of Fame guy out there every single year. Participates, helps out with the ceremonies. If you do want to know about the past of the National Football League, Russell Baxter, as good as it gets. All right, Johnny Mac and I. We'll come back. We got one last segment. We got to put a bow on the show here on the Monday edition of Birds 365.